Thank you all for joining us for the Undergraduate to Graduate Workshop. Joining us today are Dr. Andrew Hansen, Dean of the Honors College, Dr. Kate Corrigan, Dean of the Graduate College, Shivanji Kurania, Master's Student in Management Information Systems, and Emily Strickler, Master's Student in Public Health. Dean Corrigan and Dean Hansen are going to be discussing the differences between the undergraduate and graduate experience and providing you with resources that can help you transition. Towards the end of the workshop, we are going to have a Q&A session with current graduate students where you can ask them questions about their very own experiences. So I'm going to hand it over to Dean Corrigan and Dean Hansen to get us started while I share the slides.
Well, hello and welcome, everyone. I wish I could say it's a pleasure to see you and to be with you, but we will get back to those days here hopefully soon. In the meantime, I'm so very grateful that you're joining us virtually, and I really genuinely hope that you're taking care of yourself and doing well. I know that these are incredibly challenging times. So I also want to commend you that in the midst of all of the challenges that we're facing with pandemic and recession and endemic social injustice, that you're excited to be here with my colleague and friend, Dr. Hansen, to talk to you about how to plan to be a competitive applicant and make that successful transition into graduate school.
Great, welcome everyone. It's always a great pleasure to put this workshop on a Friday morning and see so many people show up and attend. I think Dr. Corrigan and I have been doing this for at least 6.5, 7 years. I don't even remember when we first started, but we did our very first workshop like this on a Friday morning in person in the Student Union. And we were expecting maybe a couple of students to show up, and we had a number of students sort of like today. So it's great that there are so many students who are interested in going to grad school and making that transition from undergrad to grad. We'll take turns today, sort of bouncing back and forth as we progress through our slides. So that's how we'll proceed.
And I'll just add one other thing. I have to apologize. I have some furry friends who live with me, and they occasionally act out. So I apologize in advance if there's barking or squeaking. I'll turn my mic off and toss it back to Dr. Hansen. Thanks for your patience. All right, so I guess we'll start with the very beginning, the very first question, which is what the heck is grad school and why should you consider doing it? So, you know, you can see there, there's a bit of a comic for you to take a look at. You know, grad school is one of those life experiences and one of those opportunities that a lot of people really don't understand what it is, why it matters, why you should do it. And it has a reputation for being a really tough haul, right, for those who sign up for grad school. We're here to tell you that that's certainly a piece of it, because of course going to graduate school means you're earning an advanced degree to become an expert in your field, even beyond the master's, of course, but it's also an amazing opportunity that both Andrew and I found really fulfilling, and I think it's a life-changing experience. So why would you consider going for advanced study beyond your bachelor's? Well, first of all, there's lots of different tracks that you'll have at the graduate school level. So you might choose to do a master's program. You might choose to jump straight into a doctoral program. You may think about doing a certificate program. Certificate programs are sort of smaller, bite-sized, 12 to 18 credits generally, where you earn a certificate at the end, which isn't a full degree, but those can sometimes be pathways to sort of test out an area of study, see if it's for you, and then you can often use those credits towards a subsequent master's or doctoral program. The other thing about graduate school is it's a very focused study. So at the bachelor's degree, you of course have your major, and that's your focal area of interest and expertise. But you take a lot of other gen ed classes, you do a lot of courses in areas that maybe you're less interested in. That, of course, is not the experience in graduate school. In graduate school, you're doing very focused, in-depth study in a very specific field, and not just a field like sociology or biology, but a sub-area of specialization within that field. The other thing that's really different about graduate school is the undergraduate teaching model is didactic primarily, which is sort of what's happening here. You have experts, professors, instructors who share their information with you, who spread their knowledge in often lecture formats. And so it tends to be a more unidirectional transfer of information from an expert to the students. In graduate school, it's much more of a conversational model. You have smaller classes. They tend to be seminar based. There's lots more discussion and peer mentorship. But there's also the basic training model in most graduate programs is what's called the mentorship model of learning, which is where you study intensely with a faculty member or group of faculty members who have very specific expertise in the area that you're interested in. And they help pass that knowledge on to you, and you help generate new knowledge by working with them. So that's a little bit of an introduction as to what graduate school is. Nev, if you don't mind. Thanks.
And Kate, I'm going to let you take this one too.
All right. So why should you do it? I think generally we say, you know, if you're not done thinking, if you still have questions, if you're still intellectually curious, or you just really feel like the real world isn't where you want to be right after your bachelor's program because you want more academic and scholarly opportunities, then that's a good sign that grad school might be for you. You should really consider grad school if you like challenges, if you like earning accomplishments, right? Without overly gamifying the experience, graduate school is a bit like a video game where you're consistently, you know, facing new challenges and have new requirements, and you're kind of leveling up as you go. And of course, in the process of doing that, what you're doing is you're building more career and professional opportunities for yourself. So as you move through graduate school and develop this expertise in your specific area, that of course opens doors to employment that wouldn't be open if you just had a bachelor's degree. As you're going to see in a moment, graduate school is also a financially strategic opportunity. Students who earn graduate degrees go on to earn more both immediately after school and across the life cycle. And we'll show you some specific numbers to give you the financial benefit of graduate school. But there's other benefits too. So having a graduate degree also correlates positively with other positive life outcomes like longevity, like job satisfaction, like engagement in your community, the kinds of things that help shape, you know, what we often think of as a good life. And then the other piece of this that I care deeply about is both as a graduate student and subsequently as you become leaders in your field, you have the opportunity to create new knowledge, to ask and answer really tough questions in your field, and to contribute to knowledge and practices that make the world a better place. So I firmly believe that going to graduate school is also a great fit for people who want to make a difference, who want to change the world in some way for the better. And last but not least, of course, graduate school is so much fun. You build great relationships with the cohort of students you go through with. You build great relationships with faculty. You travel to academic conferences. Even now you do virtual conferences. There are so many opportunities to not just learn and define who you are as a professional, but to have a really great time doing it. And so I think that's sort of the opening case for why you might want to consider graduate school.
Do you want me to take this one?
Go ahead.
All right. So as you can see, earning graduate degrees distinguishes you from the general population. So about a third of the American population ends up getting a bachelor's or a BA or a BS. But when you move on to a master's, whether it's an MA or MS, then that number shrinks. And if you're one of the few who goes on and earns a PhD or a doctorate, you're in a much more smaller segment of society. And as Dr. Corrigan said in the last slide, there's a significant financial benefit to doing that. So you can see that now there's going to be an issue in the thing I'm going to point out next, we'll talk about in a second, but if you're a male and you have a bachelor's degree, you can see that you're going to earn significantly more in lifetime earnings than a high school graduate who doesn't go on and get a bachelor's degree. and a similar bump for women, although clearly there's a difference in the amount of money that men versus women make, and that's obviously an issue. But you can see in the next bullet point that when you go on and get a graduate degree, that lifetime earning bumps up even more. So for men, it's 1.5 million more than what someone with just a high school degree gets. And for women, that number's bumped up to 1.1 million more than their high school counterparts. All right, so why would you want to do this in addition to just the financial reason? Well, I'm going to speak in this slide more to my specific background, and just to tell you what that is. I have a bachelor's in nursing, and then I went back to school and got into geology, and I have a master's in geology, and then got my PhD. And in both of those career paths that I just mentioned, for folks who want to earn a graduate or earn a degree and go into the workforce, the bachelor's oftentimes leads you into entry-level technical positions. But if you want to do more than that, if you want to have greater opportunities beyond those sort of entry-level positions, then going to graduate school is a great deal, because then you can start to have more control over where your career goes. So in my discipline in geology, if there's still a large number of people who pursue master's degrees in that field who end up working in industry, and if they have a bachelor's degree, they can be hired to do technical work. But for what's considered sort of the entry-level position, a master's degree is what's sort of expected if you want to have a professional career in that industry. And if you get a PhD, that's great. There are certain things that will happen with that. It gives you advanced opportunities, although, as Dr. Corrigan said, you're becoming a specialist. And so in some regards, you're becoming more and more focused. And so if that focus is in line with what you want to do, that's exactly what you should pursue. So for example, if you want to be a professor at a university, anything beyond community college is probably going to require that you have a PhD to be competitive for a position in academia. And then if you pursue government research positions, those almost typically are PhD trained people, or any other sort of research focused job oftentimes requires a PhD. But for all of these graduate degrees, you end up with more decision-making control, and you have more opportunities to advance your career into management and other advanced possibilities. So there's some details we'll talk about with regards to how you go forward if you've made that decision that you want to go to graduate school. So obviously you're going to have to apply, just like you had to apply to be a student as an undergraduate. And usually you start that in fall semester, but it can vary. And most students who start in fall semester. That's the main point here. But not all students start in the fall of any given year. And there are some departments and some programs that will admit students either in the spring or in the summertime. And I like to point that out because it's a common misperception that all students starting graduate programs start in the fall. And that'll play into some of the issues we talk about with regards to financial support when you go off to grad school. But you're going to want to check the websites, and there's two really important places that you'll want to pay attention to. The graduate college, which Dr. Corrigan oversees at UNLV, has its set of requirements that every student applying to any graduate or certificate program would have to complete. But you're applying to do work in a department with a faculty member. And so you need to pay attention to not just what the graduate college says they require, but also what the department says that they require. So some deadlines are as early as late fall of the year before you start. So if you want to start in the fall of next year, some applications would come as early as December, and there may be some that are creeping even approaching November. So you're going to want to pay attention to what the deadlines are for the program that you're interested in. Now, most of the applications have deadlines that come a little bit later, like in January through March time. But when you apply, you're going to want to do the FAFSA if that's an option for you, because that will help determine what sort of financial resources can be available for you as well. Some other things that you're going to need to plan for is when you apply, many places will allow you to submit an unofficial transcript, and they will use that for their evaluation processes. But if you are offered admission and you accept, you will absolutely have to submit an official transcript. And you'll need those from any higher education institution that you've attended. So the other thing with regards to transcripts is you're going to want to pay attention to whether the program you're applying to has a minimum GPA requirement. And if it does, and if your GPA doesn't rise to that level, then I would tell you not to even apply, because there's likely going to be someone who's simply an administrative assistant who sits in an office collecting applications as they come in. And if they have a minimum GPA of, say, a 3.3, and you have a GPA of 3.25, then your application almost certainly won't even be reviewed by the people who would make admission decisions. Instead, it will be cut at that point by the administrative assistant. Other thing to think about is now you've decided where you want to go, and you realize you meet the minimum requirements. Well, you're going to need to do some planning. So give yourself plenty of time. Don't wait till the last minute. And particularly don't wait till the last minute when you ask for letters of recommendation, because the person who's going to be writing that letter for you is somebody who you want to think positively about you. And if you've asked them, 2 days before they have to submit something to write a letter for you, that puts a pressure on them, and they're not going to appreciate that. So make sure that you know when things are due and plan accordingly so that you can make all those kinds of asks with plenty of time. With regards to letters of recommendation, almost everything that we could imagine you're going to apply for will require a letter of recommendation. And there's a tricky little thing that I want to describe about waiving your rights for for your ability to see those letters. So in the US, there is a law that says that a student who's applying for something like graduate school has a legal right to see the letters that were written on their behalf. But you're also given the opportunity to either maintain those rights or to waive those rights. And there's an issue here that most people are unaware of. So let me explain how this works. There have been times in the past where someone has applied for something and they were denied that thing. And then they asked to see the letters of recommendation that were submitted on their behalf. And they made the argument that they didn't get an offer, or they didn't get the job, or they didn't get admitted to the graduate program because somebody who wrote a letter of recommendation said something that was not positive about them. And in at least a case or two, those individuals who were applying have sued the person who was writing the letter, and they, in some cases, have won. And so because there's this history of letter writers being sued by angry applicants who were rejected, there's a tendency amongst letter writers to not put anything negative in a letter if they know that there's a possibility that the applicant would actually see that letter somewhere in the future. So because of that, when a reviewer reads two letters that are both glowing, and one is submitted for a student who has waived their right versus one that's been submitted for a student who has not waived their right, there's always a seed of doubt in the reviewer's mind about whether the one where the student retained their right was fully forthcoming in their description of the applicant. That concern on the reviewer's part goes away if you've waived your right. Now the reviewer reads this glowing letter and they're like, I believe that this is a great student and a great letter. This letter, they knew that they weren't in fear of being sued, so they've been able to fully disclose how they feel about this person, and everything clearly is great about this applicant. In the other case, there could be a great applicant and a great letter, but the reviewer might wonder, was there something that the writer didn't say because they knew that the student had retained their right and therefore potentially would see it sometime in the future and have a negative outcome from that? So you're legally welcome to keep your right. It is your right, but I always advise students to go ahead and waive your right when you ask for a letter of recommendation for that reason that I just spelled out. Now, there's some standardized test scores that still are commonly used. One of those is the graduate record exam, the GRE. We are starting to see a trend where fewer and fewer programs are requiring the GRE. The LSAT you will need for law school. The MCAT is absolutely essential if you're applying to medical school. So just make sure you know when you can take those, what the deadlines are, and what the costs of each of those things are. And if you're an international student that comes from a country where English isn't the language of instruction, then you'll need to take a language placement test like the TOEFL or any of the others that are listed there. And also, if your transcript is in a language other than English, you will need to have your transcript reviewed so that the people in the US who are reviewing that transcript can fully assess what your past record is. Dr. Corrigan, is there any other comment you want to make on that transcript review, or did I cover that?
You did great. I just put a note in the chat, just reminding folks of a common mistake, which is that if you have a copy of your transcripts that you get in a sealed envelope from, the college or universities you've attended at the bachelor's level, don't open that envelope, because if it's opened, those transcripts are considered unofficial. So just a little insider trick when you're asked to submit official transcripts, they either have to be sent directly from your prior colleges or universities, or you have to get them in a sealed envelope from those colleges and universities and forward it in that sealed envelope to wherever you're applying. So
good point.
That can save you some hassle.
You want to take the first three here, Kate, and then I'll take it from there?
Sure, yeah, application information. So Andrew's done a great job laying out what to expect in the application process. A couple of just extra notes, and that is when you apply, almost everyone has online applications now. Certainly we do at UNLV, they're very common. And generally, as you heard, there's a centralized application at the university, generally through the graduate college, as we do here, and then specific requirements depending on which program or programs you are applying to. So pay attention to those requirements. Generally, they're uploaded together in the same application, but at a few colleges and universities, they still have you send different pieces of your application to different places. So just be alert to that. Wherever you apply, there will be an application fee, and it's generally less expensive if you're a US citizen or green card holder, and slightly more expensive if you are an international student, simply because it takes extra work to evaluate your applications and your transcripts. At UNLV, it's $60 for US students and $95 for international students for each application. So unlike undergraduate, it's not one application to the university and then you pick your grad program. It's very different. You're applying specifically to each graduate program you're interested in within the university with a separate application. So that's worth noting. I strongly encourage you to create an application spreadsheet so that you can keep track university by university or where you're applying, what the deadlines are, if it's a centralized upload electronically, or if there are different items going to different places, keep track of who you've spoken to, etc. So we're going to share more information about that, but imagine starting your spreadsheet and include on that how much it's going to cost so that you can budget accordingly. As you think about how many schools to apply to, it's probably pretty similar to some of the advice you got when you were thinking about colleges. It's a good idea to apply to a couple of dream schools or push schools, graduate programs that would just be absolutely perfect and ideal for you, but that might be a little bit of a push to get into. Aspire high in everything, and that applies here as well. And then, of course, you should apply to some schools that you'd be really excited and happy to be at, that you're pretty confident you can get into, and maybe at least one that you're absolutely certain you can get into and that offers a program that will work for you, so that you have a broad array. Of course, how many you do depends partially on how much you can afford based on those application fees. So keeping a spreadsheet is a good idea, just to gather all the information and then prioritize your applications. And so, in terms of strategies, again, there's no common app at the grad level. So keeping in mind, not just how much each application is and what they require, but what those deadlines are, when you send things off, who you are in touch with along the way. All of that is helpful information that if you keep in one place, you will find it's a much less stressful application season, and it'll save you time and worry, I think. So I will hand it back to Dr. Hansen.
Yeah, so the other thing to think about when you're thinking about which schools you want to apply to is that, as was mentioned earlier, graduate education is really the mentorship model, meaning you're going to work really closely with whoever your advisor is. And so, the reputation of a university and the reputation of an individual faculty member might not be exactly the same. And so you shouldn't just think of the top schools that are known reputationally as the best schools for what you want to do. You want to think about which faculty at which universities are doing really cool, great stuff that's what I want to do. And the best people to ask with regards to trying to figure out which are the best people and the best programs out there right now is to ask the faculty members here that you're working with. And they'll be able to tell you, like, this school has a great reputation overall, but their department in our field just isn't that strong. So I would recommend that you choose this other place if you're considering a school like the one you named. The other thing to think about is the faculty member that you consult with will also be likely to steer you away from schools where there's either not an opportunity or there's a bad fit. So I'll give you 2 examples of how that might play out. I have a colleague who's an incredibly well-known faculty member and is incredibly successful at the University of Arizona. But I know from talking to him that he will only take PhD students and actually only prefers to take on postdocs. And so if a master's student came to me and said, hey, I want to work with Professor D at the University of Arizona, I would say, don't bother, because your application is not going to get accepted because he doesn't take master's students. So you won't know that kind of information from websites or just from general reputations, but faculty may be able to help you steer where you decide to go. There are also, unfortunately, sometimes when I've advised students not to go to a particular school and to work with a particular faculty member because maybe that faculty member has a bad reputation with regards to how they treat female students, for example. So if you're considering going to a school and you ask somebody that you're working with here at UNLV about, hey, I'm thinking about applying to go to work with this person. And if they say, well, I would maybe consider some other options. That's a key to you that you really should think really carefully about whether your initial plan is a smart one or not. And then with regards to who you specifically want to work with, it should be driven by what your interests are with regards to how you want to proceed in your research or scholarly or performance endeavors. It's really important that the person that you end up working with is doing the kind of thing that you hope to do longer term. So paying attention to what their specific interests are and what they do is really key. Another thing to look at is how successful their previous grad students have been. Did they get funding? Were they able to produce publications? And where are they now? If you want to go the academic route, well, if you have to decide between 2 faculty members at 2 different universities, and one of them has a great track record of producing PhD students who go on into academic tracks, and that's one option versus somebody else who doesn't have that sort of record, then you might want to choose the first one because of that. And then a really important thing that you're going to want to figure out, and you won't necessarily be able to do this at the time that you're applying, but if you get an offer from a school, you should visit that school if at all possible to you. And a key group that you want to talk to are the advisees of that faculty member now. And are they happy? Do they like being at that school? Do they like working with that professor? Or are they miserable? How well are they funded? Is their advisor able to cover any costs that the university doesn't cover? Or are they having to pay for those things themselves? And then lastly, how long does it take somebody to get through that program? if you have somebody who's going to require, or a school that the normative time to get your graduate degree is 4 years, and at a different school it's 6 years, well, those 2 years might be worth considering, like, okay, what's the cost that I'm going to incur because of that? And was it worth it to stay at that school when it's going to take longer? So those are all things to consider as you're deciding where to apply. Okay, and then as we've said it a couple of times, this is more about doing research than taking class. Now every graduate program that I'm aware of will require a certain amount of coursework, but it may be very limited. In fact, the PhD program that I graduated from only required that I take 4 classes. So it really is more about doing research and producing research results than it is about attending classes. So you really want to focus on that research side of things. Now, when you apply, you want to be able to articulate what your research interests are. And you don't have to be right down to the nitty-gritty of what exactly you want to work on, but you want to be able to give them a sense of, if you come to their program, who are you likely to work with? And which faculty members are they likely going to try to pair you up with? And so they need to do that because faculty members have to be willing to take on new advisees. So I'll give you an example of how that's played out. There was one point when I was still a faculty member in the geoscience department here, where I had about 8 graduate students, and I was stretched to the max trying to supervise all of those students and do all of the other aspects of my job. And so when we admitted students that year, the person who was in charge of graduate admissions came to me and said, hey, there's a great student who probably would end up working with you. Do you want us to admit them? And I said, you know, that's a great student, and I hate to say no, but I really ethically can't take on another student because I'm already not doing the great job with the students that I have. And so you won't know that when you're applying unless you ask. So it's totally appropriate to reach out via email or however else you choose to, and contact a prospective future research advisor and say, are you planning on taking any new students? And if they say, no, I'm not, then don't apply there, because that application won't be successful. It's also appropriate when you ask them if they're planning on taking any students to ask if they have any funded projects. And that will matter, because if they have funding, then they're going to be looking for students to come in and work on a particular project. Whereas if they don't have funding, it might be a harder thing to make work. Now, this is some of what I'm saying is true more for the disciplines where I come from, which is on the STEM side of things. And Dr. Corrigan probably has some other information on things that are not in the STEM realm. So I'm going to turn it back to her for a second.
Great, thanks. So I just want to, before I talk about fields outside of STEM, I just want to point out another distinction. So you'll be deciding as you shop around for which pathway is right for you and your career, you'll be shopping around between not just master's and doctoral programs and specific disciplines, but you'll also be considering what are called professional or research-based programs. And so at UNLV, we talk about both professional and research masters, as well as professional and research doctoral degrees. Let me very briefly tell you the difference. So professional degrees generally are slightly less research-based and slightly more applied. So you're more likely to do an internship. You're more likely to be studying in a field where when you leave the degree program, you're entering a kind of professional labor force at a more leadership level. So for example, if you're going for your MBA in business, or you're going for your master's in social work degree, these are some examples of professional master's programs that are scholarly, of course, but where the goal is to teach you applied skills to work in those specific fields. Research degrees are a little bit different. As you might guess, they're much more research and scholarship heavy. You are generally expected to write a thesis in a research master's program. That is not generally the requirement in a professional program. And so you're engaging in original research for that master's thesis. And oftentimes research master's students continue on into a PhD program. At the doctoral level, we also see a distinction between professional and research programs. but the majority of doctoral programs tend to be research-based, where you're doing independent, autonomous, original research, and you then present at the end of that something known as a dissertation. It's basically a book manuscript in your field of study, or 3 published articles that are sort of put together in a manuscript. So that's the research track in doctoral programs. The professional doctoral programs are more like things like the Doctor of Musical Arts, the Doctor of Physical Therapy, the Doctor of Nurse Practitioner. These are programs where, again, you do research and scholarship, but you're training to be applied experts who are doing hands-on work in the field of nursing, the field of physical therapy, etc. So it's a little bit different depending on which of those tracks you're going on. Applied tracks tend to be more about professionalization, internships, hands-on skills. Research-based tracks use that mentorship model even more, and you're really developing expertise with your faculty advisor and graduate advisory committee in a very specific, and sometimes people might say esoteric, area of inquiry, something very niche. And then we have the STEM and non-STEM distinction, right? And STEM, of course, stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. But STEM includes things like anthropology, sociology, some of the social sciences as well. So I think the STEM, non-STEM difference matters, but in terms of what you can expect of the experience, I almost think that the professional versus research distinction is even more significant as you consider which pathway works best for you.
And the bullet point that says stage in your mentor's career has to do with when you're trying to figure out where you're gonna want to go and who you'd like to work with. Faculty members, you're going to want to work with a tenured or tenure track faculty member most likely. And although there's research faculty members that might be great choices too. If somebody who's on a tenure track is typically hired as an assistant professor. Once they get tenure, they're promoted to associate professor. And once they have a really well-established professional career in academia, they're promoted to professor. So someone who's a brand new assistant professor might be great, but they're less likely to have grant funding at that point than somebody who's later on in their career. And so they might not be able to support your path educationally at the same level as somebody who's more well established. Another thing to think about is once somebody is granted tenure, they typically apply for a sabbatical leave. And so if you're applying to a school to work with a particular professor, and the time that you would be starting would be when they are going on sabbatical, that may still be a great option, but it may be something that you want to consider, because if you've got a couple of really great choices and you're going to be starting at one school and your advisor's on sabbatical and maybe not even around, you're going to have less engagement, less coaching and such from that situation than if you go to a place where the advisor is going to be there. And that first year of your program is especially important in that regard. So it's just something to think about. If you've got somebody who's perfect for what you want to do and they're going to be on sabbatical and they accept you, go. But it's just one more thing to think about. On your application, you're going to want to talk a bit about what your general interests are and also what you're more specifically interested in. That doesn't have to be super specific, but they want to know where it is you're trying to go. And a problem that sometimes happens is a student who's applying doesn't really specify what their particular area of interest is. So I remember when I was the graduate coordinator in the GEO department, getting an application from a student who said, I loved every one of my undergraduate geology classes, and I would be happy to go to graduate school in any particular subdiscipline. And we rejected that applicant because we looked at it and we said, well, this person really hasn't figured out what their specific area is that they want to pursue. So you do need to narrow it down somewhat, but that will vary by discipline as well. Okay, so I'll talk through some funding things, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because this isn't the way that most people get funded. But there sometimes is corporate or foundation funding for scholarships. So we had a student in GEO who was Latina, and a national oil company wanted to increase the diversity, and so they offered to pay for her tuition and fees while she was a student. And so she was funded by that corporation. And when she was done, she went to work for them. So that's sometimes happens. There are some other nationally competitive awards. So if you are in the STEM disciplines and you are going to graduate school, I would encourage anybody who's a senior to apply for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It's an incredible funding thing. Students who get that get $100,000 over 3 years to support themselves while they're in school. The Rhodes, Marshall, and Mitchell are all like very prestigious, very competitive, very low success rates. But for the students who apply for those and get those, they are really significant marks on somebody's career path. The Truman Scholarship is for students who want to go into public service careers, and the Ford Foundation pre-doc fellowships are specifically for minority students who want to go on into doctoral programs. So I would encourage you to check out any of those. Those are all programs that we coordinate through the Honors College here at UNLV. So if you have questions about any of those after you've looked at a website, by all means, reach out to me. Other things to think about is not all offers that you might get for funding for a graduate program will be equal. So if you are in a type of program where it's common for them to support you financially, and I guess I should make this point, many students don't realize that when you go to graduate school, in some cases, all of your costs may be covered. Now that's sort of dependent upon the discipline that you're in. But some students aren't even aware that that is the case, when in fact it is. But if you're in one of those disciplines where it's common that you get a financial offer as part of your admission to the university, you want to look carefully at what that offer includes. So what I mean is, if the University of Montana says, you know, we want to admit you and we'll give you a stipend of $15,000 each year for however many years, okay, that's great. If you get a similar offer from UCLA and they say, we'll give you a stipend of $15,000 for the same number of years, for the same amounts, those two offers aren't the same, because your cost of living is going to be way higher in Los Angeles than it is in Missoula, Montana. So you want to think about those kinds of things as well. And then there are a variety of different kinds of financial aid that are available. As we mentioned before, by all means, complete the FAFSA. And I think Dr. Corrigan commented in the chat that if you aren't eligible for the FAFSA and you're applying to a place like UNLV, there's an alternate FAFSA that is another way that people can tap into certain financial resources. Do you want to talk about this one, Kate?
I would love to. All right. So graduate assistantships are one of my very favorite topics. And it's because, as you heard, these are the way that students can attend graduate school for free or virtually for free. So graduate assistantships, whether you're at UNLV or at another university, they're competitive, right? Not every applicant is offered a graduate assistantship. And not all graduate assistantships are alike. So it's worth understanding some of the nuances of these programs. So generally, graduate assistantships fall into two sort of big buckets or categories, TAs or RAs. TAs or GTAs are graduate teaching assistants. Not surprisingly, these are the students who are working as TAs with faculty in large classes, doing grading, running labs. Sometimes TAs are teaching their own college level classes, generally at the 100 or 200 level. We also have GRAs, or just RAs, and RAs are research assistants. And these folks are hired to work with faculty members on very specific research projects. These research projects may or may not align with the student's specific area of their own independent research. So in STEM fields, it's very common for students to get a research assistantship with their advisor on an area of research that's related to or substantially the same as their own master's thesis or dissertation work. In other fields, or in some STEM fields, when you have a research assistantship, you work on a faculty member's project, and it might be very different from what you're doing in your own academic and scholarly work. So GTAs and GRAs are the sort of two broad categories, but many universities, including UNLV, have other categories of GAs. So for example, we have a program called PDGRAs, not to make it too alphabet soup-y, but PDGRAs are Professional Development Graduate Research Assistantships. And the idea is that we have non-academic units on campus who can provide professional and research-based opportunities for graduate students, fund you as a GA, and have you then do that work out of specific offices. So for example, student services, financial aid, the graduate college, these are all non-academic units. We're not academic departments, right? Who fund GAs to do meaningful high-level projects with us on an annual basis. So generally what graduate assistantships do is they require up to 20 hours of work per week with whoever you're working with, your mentor, your supervisor, whoever. And during that 20 hours, you're doing teaching, research, or some combination thereof. And in exchange, you earn a stipend and you generally get your tuition paid and some benefits. So at UNLV, you get a stipend, we pay your tuition. There are a few small fees that you still have to pay on your own. And we pay for $1,000 towards student health insurance if you opt into that plan. So it doesn't pay 100% of your insurance, but it pays a piece of it. So that's the package. And then that means that you essentially go to graduate school free. So what happens if you're admitted and you're offered an assistantship? You should take it. There's very little downside to assistantships because besides the financial benefits, you're getting that work experience and that mentorship with your advisor 20 hours a week. And that helps your networking. It helps you build your resume or your curriculum vitae. If you're not familiar with that term, a curriculum vitae or a CV is an academic resume. And so there are just lots of benefits. But if you're admitted and you're not offered a GA, what do you do? And I think it depends on a few things. First, it depends on your field of study. So in STEM fields, particularly the hard sciences and engineering, it's pretty common to get an assistantship. And so, you know, it would be a little bit unusual in those fields to accept admission without funding or without the promise of funding starting soon. In other fields, the social sciences, the humanities, business, professional masters and professional doctoral programs, assistantships are less common and more competitive, and it's not atypical to have a bunch of students accept admission and matriculate in programs without having an assistantship at the beginning of that experience. So a little bit depends on your field, and you need to sort of learn about that based on doing some online research on websites, talking to your instructors, your letter writers, your mentors to find out. The other thing is, as you're considering which program to accept admission to, let's assume you apply to multiple and you get into multiple, then you have to decide which one to pick. And I would strongly encourage you to weight heavily those opportunities that give you assistantships, both for the financial, but also for the professional and networking and mentoring benefits that come with that. But don't just look at the assistantship offer. It's worth looking at how much the assistantship covers, how much is the stipend, how much is the cost of living where you're going. So our stipends at UNLV are competitive, but they're not the highest, right? On the other hand, we live in a state where there's no state income tax. That helps a lot. So you might get an extra $1,000 or $2,000 or maybe even $3,000 in your stipend offer at, let's say, a prestigious university in Northern California. But the cost of living and the state income taxes will far exceed the extra $2,000 or $3,000 stipend that you're getting. So you need to sort of look at it as an entire package, along with the fundamental question of which program and which faculty are best for you and the area of expertise you want to cultivate in grad school. The other thing to think about is what the GA entails. So is it 20 hours a week? Is it doing research, teaching? How many years is it being offered to you? If it's a 1 year, is it typical for them to renew? And up to how many years is a graduate assistantship renewable? These are really critical questions to ask as you're assessing the offers. The other question to consider is how much opportunity there is beyond the assistantship for things like scholarships, or as you progress in your program, might there be fellowship opportunities? That just gives you a broader picture of the financial landscape at each university you're considering. So happy to take questions about that later, but I think that gives you at least a pretty strong introduction to graduate assistantships for now.
So you've gotten some information about why you might go to graduate school, how you might proceed with the application process, and what sort of funding supports there are. Next, we're going to move on and talk about some of the issues that you probably want to be aware of. So there are certain things that are considered red flags in a student's application. So if you've delayed or gotten low grades in certain important core classes, the person on the reviewing side might view that with a bit of skepticism. If you've had to repeat classes multiple times, or you've withdrawn from classes multiple times, or if you just have a low GPA, those might be causes for concern. Now, sometimes you can have some of these things and there's a good reason for it. So like if your GPA is overall really good and you had one semester where just everything came crashing down and you ended up with a low GPA for that semester, but then the next semester you're back on track again, that's probably something that a good reviewer would look at and go, well, something clearly happened there. And if somebody who's maybe one of your letter writers can comment that in that term, this thing happened to you, and so there's a reason for it, then those become less of an issue. If you're applying to a program that requires a GRE, that score will be factored in somewhat. For me, I learned that the GRE score that mattered most to me was the verbal score for applicants, because in my discipline, the students typically did pretty well in the quantitative side of things. But I learned from experience that if an American student had a low verbal GRE score, those students oftentimes really struggled when it came time to write their thesis. And so there are certain red flags like that faculty advisors pay attention to. The part of your application will be a personal statement. So in that, I think you should say, this is who I am. These are the kinds of things I've been doing. This is what my interest is. Here's where I'm trying to go. And I think I would fit well in your program. But if that statement is poorly written or doesn't really articulate who you are, what motivates you, and where you're trying to go, that will be taken as a red flag. Some students lack self-esteem or lack confidence, and if you're applying to something where they're considering putting you as a teaching assistant, and they have concerns about whether you'll even be able to stand in front of a class and instruct the class, then those sorts of issues can hurt you as well. Something that oftentimes surprises people, especially coming from a STEM person like me, is that if a student lacks creativity, that's a real concern. We tend to think of like these scientists work in labs and they follow these protocols, and yes, maybe we do, but it's the really great scientists who run into problems as the research proceeds, who then step back and go, what caused that? And what was wrong in our thinking? And how can we do something different to get around that, or to answer this question in a way that works instead of the way we were trying? And that sort of creativity is really crucial for anyone, I think, going on for these sorts of degrees. So, there are some students who do really well on the kinds of things that you learn in K through 12 that you continue on as an undergraduate. In other words, you learn how to be disciplined, you learn how to read things, you learn how to process stuff and put it back on an exam. But if you're sort of the cookbook student, as I would call it, who just likes to follow the steps and doesn't think beyond that, then that can be a bit of an issue. So these are all things that will come out in different parts of your application. And I want to stress, there may be few of these things here that are going to sink your application. But if there's a bunch of these, then it starts to become a bigger lift to get you into a graduate program. And then there's mistakes. Do you want to take this one, Kate?
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So there are also some active mistakes that we see people make that we want to warn you about, right? These are things that if you know about them, you can avoid them, and that will strengthen your application and give you more options. So weak letters or letters from people who can't comment on your abilities. Now, if you're going into a research master's or research doctoral program, you want faculty members who can speak specifically to your writing skills, as you heard, your creativity. People forget the value of that, and your research skills and experiences if you've had them. If you've not had research, hands-on research experience or opportunities to participate in on a research team, if you're not yet ready to graduate this semester, there's still time. Reach out to some faculty members, see if there's a way you can volunteer or join their team. The strongest letters are those that can speak with the most specificity to the kinds of skills you need to succeed in graduate school. So be careful of who you select for your letter writers. If you select someone who might, be really prestigious and be able to say what a great human you are, that's nice, but that's not going to give you the edge over someone who's competing for a seat in a professional or research graduate program. If, of course, you're applying to a professional program and you've had work experience in that field, then that's the kind of thing you really want someone to be able to speak to in your application. For those fields where you should really have an advisor or a few faculty in mind as people who do work that you're interested in and that you'd like to work with, you need to reach out to those folks. If they get an application in a department that uses this mentorship model, and you've not reached out to anyone and you haven't specified an advisor, or you specify an advisor who's never heard of you before because you haven't called or emailed or done any outreach, that's going to weaken your case. What you want when the admissions committee sits down and looks at your application, what you want is for them to say, and have someone at that table recognize your name and know why you're applying to their program specifically, what kind of area you're interested in, who you'd like to work with, etc. Again, for professional programs, this is less of an issue, right? Because you don't have that one advisor who mentors you. Focused area of interest and poorly written statements, I think, go together. Your written statement is really where you show people who you are, and they want to know who you are as a researcher, a scholar, a professional in your field or desired field. And so make sure that your writing statement is obviously, error-free, no typos, no grammatical errors, no spelling errors. There's no excuse. You've got grammar check, you've got spell check, you have friends, you have colleagues, you have faculty who care about you. Put more eyes on this letter, run it through all of the software you have to correct any mistakes and make sure that it's perfect. That's the formal side. The substance side is just as important, and that is, if you have a perfectly written letter with no errors, that's a start, but it's not going to get you over that finish line of admission with a GA offer. What you're going to need is some meaty content, and so make sure, one thing you could do is you could go to faculty or go to current grad students in your program here and ask them for some samples. Like, hey, I have to write a statement to apply for graduate school. What kinds of things have worked? Can you show me any or give me any tips? Go online. There's a treasure trove of information. But it needs to be focused. It needs to say why this program for you, why this university, why these faculty, what do you want to do at the end? So more specificity is definitely better, and a perfectly written statement is really a requirement. One of the things I point out a lot is that when you move from a bachelor's program to a master's or a doctoral program, it's not a straight line. It's not like you just continue doing what you did when you were a senior in your undergraduate program. Instead, it's a jump up. So the expectations change. And so you need to show that you're ready for that in your letter, in your statement, in the package you put together, including things like who you ask for letters. Many graduate programs incorporate an interview into the process. Some of them are face-to-face. Others in normal times, some of them are face-to-face. Some use virtual interviews. even when there isn't a pandemic. I think it's safe to say this year is going to be entirely virtual interviews. And so, prepare yourself to answer questions during an interview. Practice with friends. Go online, look at sample questions. Make sure that, again, you show up as the professional that you aspire to become. So dress the part, speak the part, make sure that your lighting is correct and your technology is set. And then make sure that you're confident with some pre-prepared ideas of the kinds of information you want to convey in anticipation of the questions they're likely to ask. The last mistake I'll mention is really common, and it's very human, right? We're all human. We're not just faculty members or grad students or GAs. And the human side is you wear a lot of hats. You have a lot of responsibilities in your life now, I'm sure, and it'll only be more when you're in grad school. So you have your personal life, family, friends, relationships, maybe kids, maybe pets. You have work requirements, right? You might have a house or a car, and things are always going wrong. There are lots of other things that can be distractions, and that's human. On the other hand, the students who most successfully make it through graduate school find ways to compartmentalize and to minimize distractions, which doesn't mean you can't and shouldn't be a well-rounded human. You must be. You have to take care of your mental and your physical and your emotional well-being and nurture your relationships and eat healthy and find time for exercise, all of those things. But at the same time, graduate school is your job when you're in it. And so you have your GA-ship potentially, and even your classes and your research and your scholarship and your writing, that's your job. And you have to protect the time you give to that in order to make it successfully through your graduate program. So there are probably other things we could talk about, but this at least gives you a big overview, I think, of some of the most common challenges at that application and transition into graduate school stage.
So now that we've covered the negative points, I'm gonna move fairly quickly through some positive things. So if you're applying for a research degree, obviously having done research as an undergrad is a great thing. If you're going on to a specialized education, you should be passionate about that particular thing that you're trying to pursue. But in your application, please don't use the word passionate. Reviewers will just roll their eyes when they see that word. Instead of telling them that you're passionate, you want to show them that you're passionate. And you do that by showing them in your application all the things that you've done that are tied to that thing that's your passion in life. We already talked about creativity. Great graduate students are students who are curious and are scholarly. They're self-starters. They're people who can solve problems on their own, preferably. They work hard. They're mature. You can count on them. They're professional in their engagements with both their advisor and their peers. And they're people who have great time management skills. So those are all things that if you've got those, make sure that you talk about those somewhere in your application. And then there's some other positive attributes as well. If you did relevant work or research as an undergrad, that's great. Your letters of recommendation, if they come from people who are well known, that's clearly a positive. A letter from somebody that's an American Academy of Science will trump a letter from a troop leader every single time. And similar to the funding issue that I talked about earlier with regards to assistant versus associate versus full professors, if two letters are very similar and one comes from a full professor and one comes from an assistant professor, you might choose the one from the full professor simply because it's common to say, in the 30 years that I've been a faculty member, this student ranks in the top 1%. That carries more weight than a similar letter from somebody who's in their first year who says, I've only been teaching for a year, but this is one of the best students I've dealt with in that first year. I think you can see that there's a difference in the impact in those. Also, if you can synthesize information, that's essential. This is, as I said earlier, in undergraduate, it's common for you to have to regurgitate or put things down on an exam and that you've learned along the way. But in grad school, it's really about figuring out what is the problem, how am I going to tackle that problem, what does the data mean when I get the data, and to be able to synthesize that and to move our knowledge and our understanding of things forward. Obviously, having a strong academic record matters. And if you work well with others, if you're professional and collegial, that's important because many graduate programs or graduate research groups are really a graduate team. So there's oftentimes the faculty advisor, they might have hired postdocs, or they might have PhD students and master students, and they're all working on their own specific part of something, but it's all part of a big program that's all under the same umbrella. So being able to work with others matters. And in that regard, having great communication skills, whether that's standing up to present your results at a conference or to your team members, or if it's having great writing skills when it's come time to write your thesis, or if you're working on a manuscript for submission, communication absolutely is essential. So make sure that you bring in those positive things and try to minimize the negative things that we were talking about before.
And so in summary, maybe we'll just say there's lots of great reasons to go to graduate school. It's an amazing opportunity. If you're admitted and earn a GA-ship, it's even better. The best thing you can do right now is start your spreadsheet, do your research, start preparing application materials, speak to graduate students who you might know as teaching assistants or instructors or from your program or from campus, get their input, line up your great letter writers. If you haven't had opportunities to do internships in your field or have job experience in your field, if you're going after a professional degree, or if you haven't yet done research or scholarly activity and you're going for a research graduate degree, now's a great time to try and create those opportunities for yourself. So figure out where you'd like to head and then pursue it with confidence, right? We all doubted ourselves when we were where you are, 100% certainty, I can say that. And so please don't undercut yourself or talk yourself out of this. You're good enough, you can do this, and you've got support here at UNLV. So plan ahead and make it happen. You can do this, we believe in you. All right, so now we're going to hand it over to our amazing graduate students. These are two folks who are part of our Grad Rebel Ambassador program and work with us in the Graduate College. Shivanji from Management Information Systems and Emily from Public Health Masters program. So I think they're both going to flip on their cameras and join us. And I think each is going to share just a couple minutes of comments, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So Emily, I see you. So let's toss it over to you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'm really excited that you guys are all here on this workshop today. I think this is really great information, and I wish that I would have had something like this when I was in the process of making these decisions. So I am in my second year of the Masters of Public Health program here at UNLV. I transferred to UNLV after I had started my graduate journey online at George Washington University and found that it wasn't a great fit. And I think that that's always an important part of my story because it can seem like you need to do the right thing the first time, but sometimes life can be forgiving. So I'm really interested in the built environment and how that impacts community health. And so that's what I'm studying. I am a graduate research assistant. And so kind of chiming in on what Dean Kate was talking about, being a GA is a fabulous opportunity, and you should definitely seek those opportunities out. And yeah, I'm really excited to answer some questions with you guys today.
Thanks, Emily. Shivanji, would you like to introduce yourself?
I have my camera on today because I don't have my webcam with me, but hi everyone, my name is Shivangi and I am a first year grad student at UNLV as well. I actually went to UNLV for my bachelor's and that was in hospitality management. And it sounds a little different, but for me, during my hospitality program, I found that I was really interested in data analytics and I wanted to be, oh, are you able to hear me, Nev?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I had um, I had found my passion for data analytics, and I had seen how important information systems and technology was in the hospitality field. So I decided that I wanted to take that focus and learn more about the specific area of information systems. So I went ahead and I started to network and talk to my professors and my graduate coordinator or my potential graduate coordinator for the program when I was in my undergrad. So all the tips and tricks that both the deans mentioned are amazing because I feel like they really help. And me talking to my grad coordinator like years before I even applied really got me to understand the type of courses I was going to take and further sparked my interest in the program, which was amazing. Um, I'm also a graduate assistant at the graduate college, and I was very lucky to have found an opportunity with the systems team, which is amazing because I'm getting experience in the field that I'm working in right now, and it's just helping me further um, my knowledge and my passion for what I wanted to do. So it's amazing, and I feel like with especially with UNLV, I have gotten multiple scholarship opportunities through my college and a lot of support through the grad college. So I would definitely encourage everyone to take these tips and tricks that were offered in today's presentation because they 100% apply and they're so beneficial and they help out students so much. And it like definitely helped me take a huge burden out like financially, and also it has really led me to focus on my own passions. So yeah, I mean, I'm super excited to answer any of the questions that you guys might have, but that was a little about myself and the process I went through.
Thank you so much. So the first question we have for our graduate students is, what do you think is the biggest difference between graduate school and undergrad? Emily, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest difference, we touched a lot on how your graduate education is a lot more focused, and I'd like to kind of reaffirm that. But I also feel for the first time that being a student is kind of my full time job. So I am going to classes and I am working on a thesis, and then I am also doing research with my faculty for my GA position. And so this is the first time that I have been able in my life to kind of be all about school. I think in undergraduate, I really focused on there was a little bit more balance. Not that I don't have balance now, but I had kind of a huge range of coursework, but I wasn't just a student. I was also a student leader, and I was also, I had time for different kind of, part-time jobs and those kinds of things. And now I really feel like in my graduate program that I am a student and I am an academic, and this is kind of, the real deal. So it feels more serious in that way. Yeah, I think those are the two really big highlights, and it's just a great opportunity to kind of feel like a professional. I feel like I've been blessed with faculty who don't just treat me as like a student worker. I really feel like they're training me and mentoring me to be one of their colleagues, which is something I greatly appreciate. And so really just feel like I'm maturing in my kind of academic field, which is great.
I would like to kind of add on to what Emily said, and I agree with everything she said because being in my master's program has really made me feel that like I'm going towards a more focused career path that I wanted to pursue when I was in my undergrad and the interest that I had found during my undergrad. And even though like my undergrad was providing me with multiple opportunities, I feel like after my master's program, I'm going to be more knowledgeable in the specific field I'm interested in, and that would really help me. So I'm feeling much more confident, and I am having a lot of fun just researching and learning about the specific topic that I was interested in. So that's very beneficial. And another thing I would like to mention is not only academically, but being a part of the Lee Business School, I have gotten a lot of support and I'm having a lot of fun working with the entrepreneurship department and the resources that the Lee Business School offers. And I'm working on side projects with them. I'm learning how the business world works and just like using those resources to beyond, like just take my academics to like a further level and see like what things I can start to pursue when I'm in school, but towards my career. So it's been definitely a huge shift from my undergrad, and it's adding on to it very positively.
Thank you both. So I would like to just go back in our chat. We had a question earlier from Caitlin. On the grad level gateway, it only allows me to put up to 5 departments I am interested in for G-ships. After I submit my application, will it allow me to apply to additional departments for GA-ships? And I think Dean Corrigan wanted to address this a little further.
Yes, thank you so much, Nev, and thanks, Caitlin, for asking an excellent question. So Shivanshi is right that you can certainly add GA applications, but I think the critical point here is that academic departments generally only hire their own GAs, their own students as GAs. And so sometimes students apply and want to apply for a GA-ship in every academic program on campus or every academic program that's at all related to their field of study. And it's generally, a waste of your time applying and sort of clutters things up because academic departments, like I said, generally don't even have enough graduate assistant positions for their own students in their own programs. So what you want to do is you want to apply certainly to your own department or school where your graduate program is housed, and then you want to apply potentially to other non-academic units on campus if they have an advertisement for an available position. So GAs are not the kind of thing that you just sort of apply to all of them. You really apply judiciously to your own field, and then you can look and see if there's specific positions open in other sort of non-academic places around campus. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. So for our next question for our speakers, what are some skills that are important to have prior to beginning graduate school that are going to help me ensure my success throughout the program?
I can go first again. A couple things. I think that one really important skill that I am still working on and that I wish had been stronger at the beginning of my program was boundary setting. Being able to tell other relationships and other kind of parts of my life that I need to do grad school work. I really need to spend time with it. I think it's easy for people who are not necessarily familiar with graduate school. So I am first and low income, and so my family and my close circle, a lot of them, it's kind of a newer concept. I think, oh, you have homework, and it's like, no, I got to read for like 8 hours a day. I got to read and write for like most of the day kind of thing. And so just clear boundaries and being able to I guess that kind of leads into time management and just making sure that you're giving yourself enough time. I think that there's a way that we got work done in undergrad that was that worked for us that may or may not apply in graduate school. I think in graduate school it's much more important for you to really spend time with the material and really dig in deep, and you can't kind of get away with some of the study habits that you formed in undergraduate. So time management and boundaries and kind of being able to show up for yourself and really give yourself the best chance that you can with your own coursework. It's really important.
I would just like to add one thing that I felt was very useful, and I agree with Emily because like my family thinks that I'm still like they treat me like I'm still in undergrad, but like they don't understand the load of grad school sometimes. But one thing that really also helped me stay organized was keeping my Google Calendar very organized and like just having things like either color coded or like just very organized so that I can mentally prepare that like during one time slot um, I have to like fully concentrate because grad school just comes with a lot of responsibility and like it just also helps me like organize in terms of also knowing if I want to like network or further my professional development. So just like finding organizational tools um, in undergrad or right after undergrad helped me um, be a little more organized during grad school, if that answers.
Thank you. So for our next question, we were wondering if it's better to gain professional experience for a couple of years before applying to a graduate program, and does this vary based on program, for example, research-based versus professional? And what are some pros and cons of starting a program immediately after undergrad?
I'll chime in here.
Go ahead.
So I think if in my graduate world. If a student knows that they want to get a graduate degree and they have a good sense of what it is they're interested in, then I would say that it probably makes sense to go right on into graduate school as soon as you finish undergraduate. I will make a side comment here. So in the past, almost everybody who went on for a PhD went from a bachelor's into a master's into a PhD, but that model is no longer necessarily the case. You can still do that, but it's much more common today for students to go straight from a bachelor's into a PhD program. But what I would say is for someone who is finishing their undergraduate degree, if they're not sure exactly where they want to go, but they think they want to go to graduate school, then I would encourage them to maybe consider a master's degree first, because that will give you the really good understanding of what it means to go into a research program. And if you find out you love it and you want to do more of it, then by all means go into a PhD program. That same student who's not sure if graduate school is correct for them, even though they might be able to go into a PhD program, I would generally advise them to really think about that carefully, because then you're committing to a 4 to 5 year degree program. And if it's really not what you're going to end up wanting to do, I would not want you to waste time on it. But in the true research STEM sort of side of things, having work experience isn't an essential part. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kate Corrigan, because I think she's going to say something quite different for the professional degrees.
Yeah, so the question asked if it varies by discipline or by type of grad program, and the answer is yes, right? And so if you're starting a doctoral program, as you just heard, if you are pretty sure you want to do it, keep the momentum going. Don't lose your research skill set, your library skill set. Like, technology changes so quickly that when you have a gap, particularly in research-based programs, it's a little bit harder to come back, and it makes it less likely that you'll actually do so, just in my opinion. For professional programs, it sometimes is required that you have work experience. So there's, not to get overly complicated, but in the professional program field, there's 2 types of professional graduate programs. There's professional grad programs and there's executive graduate programs. And often it's an executive master's program. And those executive versions of professional master's programs are really for folks who have 3 to 5 or more years of experience and then are coming back in to do a master's. These are more common in like business, hospitality. We have it in crisis and emergency management, these sorts of things. So if you're going into a professional master's, it's a little bit easier if you want to go work for a couple of years and then come back. But there is something to be said about momentum either way, right? You're a student now, you're used to a student lifestyle. If you're pretty sure you want that master's, you're going to enter that labor force at a higher level and move up faster. It's probably a good investment sooner than later. But if you're not sure, go out and work for a couple of years and figure it out.
Thank you both. So can you share some benefits and disadvantages of remaining at our undergraduate alma mater to pursue a graduate degree?
I'll chime in here. So I have, as I said at the beginning, a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD, and those are from 3 different institutions. And for me, that was really beneficial because you get exposed to a variety of things when you do that. And so each school, each place has its own focus, and people on the faculty have their own areas of expertise. And so I found benefit in being exposed to a variety of different things as I progressed through those degrees. Now, I also had classmates who, in my PhD program, who had been at the same school their entire time. And so they started in a great school and they progressed right on through the PhD program and went on to great successful careers. So I think it really depends in part on if you're at a great place that has a graduate program that's exactly the kind of thing you want to go into and you can just keep on going at your current school, then there's maybe really good reasons to stay at your current school. But there's the downside, I guess, of not having sort of the same breadth of experiences. But if you're getting great depth and it's a great fit for you, then if that makes sense for you, I would stay there. And obviously for people who have things that tie them to a particular place community-wise, you may only have one choice. And so I wouldn't view that necessarily as a negative thing if the graduate program at the place you're at is in good alignment with what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that.
We also recognize it's just not as easy for every student to pack up and leave. You have ties here or family here or all of the above, and you want to ultimately stay here, then, that's a reality. And, it's more important to go to grad school if that's your passion than to give up that dream because it would mean staying and, it would mean you'd have to leave. So, yeah, I was the opposite. I actually did stay undergrad and grad at the same university, which I thought was just the kiss of death. And I did it for a variety of complex reasons. Partially, I had just an amazing deal on the table at my university that allowed me to not only be a graduate assistant, but to be an assistant journal editor, which was a great research-based experience, right? But I stayed. And what my mentors always said is you only need one job and you just have to work really hard to excel and expose yourself to other faculty and build a network nationwide to make up for the consistency of staying at one university. And they helped me do that, and it worked out, pretty well. So.
Thank you. So I think we have time for this last question. I just got in the chat. It says tenured positions in academia are decreasing. What is the appeal for students to enter into a PhD program in regards to financial benefits of earning a PhD degree mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it depends on the field of study, and be happy to chat with you more about this on the side if you have questions. But depending on the field, somewhere around 50% of doctoral graduates nationwide don't go into academia. In some fields, that number or percentage is quite high, much more than 50%. So you're right. It used to be that you get a doctoral degree to be a faculty member on the tenure track at a university. That's not necessarily the case anymore. So a doctoral degree is a prerequisite if you're going to be a faculty member. So if you want to hold open that possibility, you need the doctoral degree. But more and more and more students with doctoral degrees are successfully transitioning into other fields in government, in private industry, in the nonprofit sector. And you then enter those realms as, in the top 3% of trained folks who can be leaders in that field. So more and more graduate programs and universities are spending considerable time realigning program requirements at the doctoral level to make sure that it's training doctoral students for non-academic career pathways as well. And so those are really good questions when you're looking at programs. Those are good things to look for on their website and good questions to ask when you reach out.
Thank you. So before we wrap up today, we have about a minute left. I would just like to give a huge shout out to all of our speakers today and for our graduate students for coming to join us. This was such an informative workshop and a very important topic for undergraduate students. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. We're going to be posting the workshop on the Graduate College YouTube channel next week for your reference, in case you want to go back and look over anything. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you.